All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on making forage mixtures work for you. Tonight's webinar is co-hosted by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, as well as the Beef Cattle Research Council. I'm Stacey Domolewski. I'm the Science and Extension Coordinator for the BCRC, and I'll be your moderator tonight. This session is going to last for approximately 1 hour, but it could go a little longer, depending on the number of questions you have during the question and answer period. If you're with us on Twitter, you can tweet along with us using hashtag BeefWebinar. We are recording the session tonight, and I'll be sending out a link to the recording to everyone who registered within the next couple of days. So if you missed hearing anything tonight and want to watch it again later, you can. I would also encourage you to take some notes as well that you can look up later. It might help you to remember a little bit more of what you learned tonight. So of course, you'll be able to hear and see tonight's presenters, but we can't hear or see you. So if you do want to communicate with us, just type into the small chat window on the control panel on the side of your screen. If you have a question or comment for our presenter tonight, that's where you can enter that as well, and we'll answer them all at the end of the hour. If your internet connection is a bit slow tonight, it could help to close the webcam window. That means you're not going to be able to see us, but it'll hopefully make the audio come through a bit more clearly. It also helps to close any external any external internet thing using external internet connections as well. All right. So let's get started. So here's what we'll be covering tonight. So I'm pleased to introduce to you our first speaker of the night, Dr. Yousef Papadopoulos. He's a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and an adjunct professor at Dalhousie University and St. Mary's University in Truro, Kentville, and Nepean, Nova Scotia. He's also conducted extensive research on breeding strategies to expand the adaptation of grass and legume species to climate change, long-term persistence, reducing nitrogen fertilizer requirements, leaching and emissions, pasture biodiversity, and development of forage cultivars for novel applications. So with that, Yousef, you should be good to go. So we can't see or hear you yet. All right, there we go.
Okay, Stacy, I'm gonna get started, but I don't see your photo. But anyway, if I'm off track, just let me know, okay? Yeah. Well, good evening or good afternoon. Like you heard, my name is Yousef Papadopoulos, and I'm a research scientist with Agriculture and Food Canada. The title of my presentation today is Making Forage Mixture Work for You. And you see under the title here a list of collaborators. So the work I have is a multidisciplinary work, and I was the chosen one to speak to you. I just also want to let you know, beyond those people listed there, there's tremendous amount of power. Without them, I would have no result. My technical staff, my cooperator and their technical staff, like in Quebec City, and the summer students we have, the farm staff, and also we collaborate with the other breeder from United States and across Canada, and they work with us on many aspects of that. And also, not forget about the cows and the bees that really work for us. Also, I like to acknowledge the funding agency of the research you are about to view, and it's Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Beef Cattle Research Council, which is a division of the Canadian Cattlemen Association, and of course, NSERC. First of all, I put the slide for you. how do you decide to make what mixture to put to seed, either for hay or silage or pasture? Some of you might have been playing around with the different mixture and found something that suits you. That's good. Or you have the seed specialist from one of the seed company help you. And I put on one of the lists that Pig Seed, for example, put in. And as you can see, they have for different pasture type, they have whether it is horse or cattle or what they call premier or whatever it is, they have different species that go within it. Well, how did they come up with that? How did they decide on that? Well, hopefully I will concentrate on what we know and what you should consider, and we'll take it from there. However, so okay, you seeded this stand, or before you seeded it, you had a pasture like this, and what do? Do you plow it under? What do you do with it? The bottom line here is that before you plow it under, you really want to see what kind of species it is in there, and the majority of the species might be very productive. This is a close-up. These two photos I just showed you, this was a pasture at Nepean Research Farm where it's been seeded to a mixture of timothy and a bunch of other species. It wasn't well documented, but we've been grazed for a long time. And so I and my colleague decided to assess those pasture and see what we're getting out of it and how it's working. So we took this pasture at the Nepean Research Farm, we subdivided it just like a normal and a good management practice. You subdivide it, you rotationally graze it, and this particular slide I'm showing you in the, it shows that early in the spring we have too much growth, and we take some of it because if you don't take this one, it will ruin your rotation and you'll be grazing paddock that they were overgrown and so on. And also there'll be a lot of wastage. So we applied that and we looked at what species in there during this study. The three major contributor to that pasture species-wise from biomass, from dry matter content, was creeping red fescue, timothy, and bluegrass. Well, that's something, first of all, it's very good. I thought, why should we plow it under? Let's take a look at its productivity. Also, there were 12 different, what we consider forage species, and under 13, the group 13, I put weeds, but actually might have other species that they are really of minor use for ruminant livestock production. We did this evaluation for 5 years. As you notice, this is the every year cumulative growth. First of all, this is something not to turn your nose off. This is really a good productive pasture. On average, you're getting very good production. In the good years, you're getting between 8 to 12 tons per hectare a year total dry matter. That is very good and productive. And in these lower yield, particularly this one, we had a drought years, so obviously you got very little forage into this case. The other thing that I want to show you, I chose this particular 1996. At the original slide I showed you, this pasture was grazed by ewes and lambs, and the lamb they were lambed in February and put on pasture, and around end of May they were weaned and the ewes were taken to other pasture, and we continued collecting animal gain from the lamb. If you look at it, getting 200 gram average daily gain for some of our sheep producers, they were quite good. The reason why I chose this particular year is because we had, they were losing gain here. It has nothing to do with the pasture. They had parasite, and they were losing weight because they were severely infected. So when they were treated, they went back to the 200 gram per day. But however, beyond September, the productivity of that pasture was not as great as you like it to see. So therefore, this pasture would be good for you for a portion of the grazing season. What was also missing in that pasture is the legume. Only that we found white clover content, and this red bar here shows you how much white clover, total white clover yield was throughout the whole year. It's less than 5% of total biomass, and that's not good enough for two reasons. One of them, legume contribute to quality and also for nitrogen fixation, so productivity of this pasture should be alerted. So what you could do, you could use that same pasture, sod seed a legume back into it, and continue managing it and rotational grazing with good management practices. Now, so what kind of limitation we have on pasture in temperate region? First of all, as you've seen in that 5-year study we had, the most important limitation is the seasonality of pasture production. You look within the year, we're going to see it later on, there are peak and valley in production. So obviously, you really that really restrict your carrying capacity and also productivity of pasture. And also between years, certain years are droughty. So obviously, you have to be prepared to really complement your pasture, and you have to have a strategy. The other reason, compared to Australia and New Zealand or the tropical region of the United States, we have very short season. And in Atlantic Canada, we have approximately 800 days of grazing in a year in our region. So obviously we depend on other ways like stockpiling or bale grazing to fulfill that. So obviously these are limitations that we really need to consider for our pasture and pasture mixtures. Well, let's get started again into the story here about making mixtures, forage mixture. There is an art and science. Like I told you, some producers were trying things and they found a good balance and it worked well for them. But the science part of it, hopefully today, will help you add some tools, like just having a menu for a good dish that you want to cook.
Yes. Did you want to do a poll question here?
Yes. Would you mind to go ahead?
Yeah, for sure. So the polls is your opportunity to participate in tonight's webinar. So your answers here are anonymous to everybody else who's viewing the webinar. So we do have a couple questions throughout the webinar tonight. So the first one here is, can you identify your preferred mixture from the list below? And sorry, it's just one mixture, you can only choose one. But the first one is Timothy, Meadow Fescue, Red Canary Grass, Kentucky Bluegrass. The next one, Kentucky Bluegrass, Tall Fescue, Orchard Grass, or Meadow Brome Grass. Meadow Fescue, Timothy, Kentucky Bluegrass. Or the last one here, Reed Canary Grass, Kentucky Bluegrass, Tall Fescue, Meadow Brome Grass, and then the very last one, Other. So you guys can select the answer that most applies to you. And this one does take a bit of reading, so I'll give you a couple seconds here to get those answers in. All right, so it looks like almost everybody has an answer there. So, all right. So it looks like about 63% are using some other mixture. About 20% are using the second one there with Kentucky Bluegrass and Tall Fescue, Orchard Grass, and Meadow Brome Grass. About 10% using the first one, 5% the third one, and the fourth one is about 3%. Mm.
Okay, that's great. It's I'm not surprised to hear what I'm not surprised to hear that that other species, other mixture that you chose, it's very different than the one I've listed there. These are pasture mixture that we're going to show some study on it. My collaborator and I, we sat down and we look at what species, what kind of mixture would really we could recommend, and we wanted to test them. What I'd like you to see here is that the first most important one that we need to do is that to look at the forage species, when do they have the best productivity, what part of the grazing season? For example, there are species that do very well in the spring, and they're not as many as in the early and mid to late summer. So obviously, you're not going to have one mixture to serve your flock or your herd to really manage. So you're going to have different mixtures that some lean on early grazing, some also lean on late grazing. And actually, now we're going into winter grazing for many regions across Canada. And so the species you choose there are really how good they grow during these different growing part of the growing season. So this is very critical for you to really consider. Again, I'm going to go back to the slide here. You've seen it many times by other presenters. This is the type of growth pattern for most grasses, and this is what you require you need for your pasture, for grazing. Here you have extra feed, and of course, if you don't use it properly, it might really mess up what kind of things are going to grow for you. And here, there's the gap. You have to use different strategies, different mixture to fill this gap to make sure that you're sustaining carrying capacity and productivity in this for your pastures. So when you want to select your species, a cultivar component, you want to look at something that grow and regrow. I highlighted regrow in red. Regrowth is it's very critical because that's where you really need your feed to sustain carry capacity, also as well as to sustain a productive quality production during that part of the season. And the other one is that also you need a forage stand that is suitable from quantity and quality for a specific class of livestock. If you're trying to finish cattle or lamb on those pasture, the quality you need high quality, even though the mixture might not be as high on dry matter yield. But for cow-calf or replacement heifers, you really want a lot of forage produced. So these are the criteria you want to look when you choose for your mixture. Also, just as important, you need it to persist long enough. Perennial ryegrass grows very well for us, but we lose it in the first 2 years in many regions in Atlantic Canada. So that's not even it is a very from quality and yield is tremendous. We don't really get to put it in our mixtures. And last but not least is how companionability of each species, how they can mix up and complement other grass species in the mixtures is also very critical. And we've done a lot of study on that, and I extracted the information from previous study to decide which forage species we should be working on for the next phases that currently I'm presenting the result for you. So the next question we ask, well, do we get simple or complex mixture, how many grasses we mix, and so on. So we ran an experiment in 2004, and where we got from previous study, we chose these 4 grasses. They were complementary. Either they add value to the mixtures when you add them in, and or they will not inhibit the growth of the other grasses in there. And then, so we also, we look at combination of the 4 grasses in 2 grass, 3 grass, and 4 grass combination, and we end up with 11 total combination. Then to those 11 combination, we added 3 different legumes, and also we looked at 3 management system study here. Well, let me show you how we did this. Here we have the 11 combination. They were in 3 blocks, and we randomly put the legumes, red clover, alfalfa, and white clover, and then we had the management, grazed every rotational grazing, stockpile for midsummer. We stopped grazing after the 2nd cycle of grazing. We accumulated enough so you can use it in mid-July and August. And then this particular section where we stopped grazing in the beginning of August so we could use it in the fall. This is what it looked like. This is what the midsummer stockpiling looked like when we started grazing it. And of course, the plots are this way, and the legume goes across this way. Let's look at the result. From this slide, I really want to point to you. We seeded it in 2004. In 2005, we got this kind of species distribution. For example, Timothy was much higher than bluegrass. Eventually, bluegrass took over. Also, the other point, so obviously, the other point is the yield here, look at 3.9 tons per hectare versus 8.7. This is indicative that this mixture is still in an adaptation or the establishment mode. So obviously, we call establishment here, it's really our mixtures that take more than a year or 2 to fully establish to give you the optimum yield potential from those pastures. All right, here what I want to show you is that this is the kind of yield we got for the different combinations. First of all, in the first year, the first production year, we had significantly lower yield, and some combination were on the higher end, but the difference wasn't really huge. But when you go to the look at the more complex mixtures, you'll see they're much higher in 2007 and 2008, and then just the 2 grass mixtures. So, but also I want to point to you, look at the 4 grass combination continuously was showing it has the highest yield possible. Of course, there are some simple mixtures, meadow fescue, bluegrass, and white clover. They do fairly well and consistent. But the bottom line, in my judgment and my colleagues' judgment, is that the 4 grass mixture, the more complementary, the more number of grasses, they fill in gaps in the growth need, the growth period time, and give you a more balanced, a more productive pasture throughout the grazing season. Now, this is the same study I want to show you. We're looking at yield on this column and legume content. So obviously you want the majority of your productivity of those mixtures, this is 11 combination, to be in this area. Under rotational grazing, the majority, the best ones are the white clover based the one that mixed with the white clover. The alfalfa, and even though the alfalfa had high legume content, but it was lower yielding in the rotational grazing compared to the white clover. But when you have a mid-season stockpiling, or any stockpiling you have, you're allowing the alfalfa to grow the way it grows normally. It requires a longer period than white clover would, and all of a sudden you end up with alfalfa with the good management, giving grazing paddock more than 3 weeks of rest period. You end up with a higher legume. So obviously, what your objective for that particular pasture, you want to sustain a legume in it, you want to still have the yield, and you want to have both of them together. So this study shows very good pastures, as you can see. In the spring, this is a spring of, when you look at it, a very dense, good productive pasture. It's got a good combination. This is 2007. It was seeded 2004. There's good legume content, this alfalfa. But when you go to 2008, you start seeing a thinning of that pasture. That's again, when you look at the dandelion, this is when the spring indicator for us. You see a lot of dandelion, this is when. But when you come to the midsummer, this pasture here had a white clover combination with those grasses here, and the red clover, and red clover doesn't persist long enough, and the gut disappeared under this area. Look at the productivity of alfalfa. It really comes and complement the slow growth of the grass around that period and give you a good regrowth potential and regrowth yield and good quality. This is the white clover here on the other side, comparing it to the alfalfa. It's very clear that alfalfa will give you better biomass. But also take a look here. There are a lot of dandelion leaf in the mid of production. Still, the leaves are thriving. It's a bit more weedy, and the grasses are not, of course, at this part, mid growing season, are not really contributing as much as you need during the midsummer production. So obviously, choosing the right grass and legume combination and the right management for each species is very critical. This research I just showed you, it got published in the Canadian Plant Science in 2012, and over 5 years of this forage mix, we noticed that increasing complexity of mixtures, more grass types, increase forage yield. And also we noted Timothy bluegrass in mixture can enhance yield. It will add rather than compete, and so on. Now the second phase we looked at, we wanted to do, we looked at mixture, simple mixture. This is a beef cluster study. It's coming to conclusion in March, and we want to look at to develop a simple forage mixture for long-term and low-cost beef grazing management in different environments. The research trials were established in Nepean, which Nova Scotia under grazing, and 2 sites in Quebec where they simulated grazing using clipping. And it was seeded in 2010, and grazing or clipping started in 2011. We chose these 6 species. We put them in combination with alfalfa, trefoil, and white clover. We replaced the red clover because we want something longer lived perennial than red clover. And so at Nepean, we had 3 cultivar versus in Quebec, they use only 1 cultivar. And in Nepean, we end up with 54 mixtures of all those combinations. This is a slide that shows you that how this is the group of of those grass mixtures on trefoil. These are with alfalfa, and this is white clover. Under frequent clipping, you notice that the trefoil seems to be the grass trefoil mixture seems to be the highest yielding, the more productive when you compare it to undergrazing. So in a way, the take-home message from this is that binary mixture perform differently under frequent clipping and cattle grazing. So obviously, we really need to impose grazing on those trials to really have a good indication under grazing. On the other hand, this kind of information can give you indicator if you really want to grow it for forage production per se, and you can like harvest it for frequent silage harvest. I know now in my region, a lot of dairy farmers really want the quality, and they go on and clip every 4 weeks, or they have about 4 or 5 harvesting during that summer. So obviously, clipping information is not that, it is useful, but if you really want to look at pasture mixtures, you really have to put them under the pressure of animals. Now let's move on to forage species and varieties that perform well under grazing. Remember, we established this in 2010, and the productivity, what we started seeing, and the compatibility look very good. We looked at the number of plant per square meter. The black columns here are the grasses. You're getting about 30 plants per square meter. That's very good. That's very well. And the legumes are really doing very well. Most of them are between 30 and 40. So in 2012, that's the second production year, they're still looking good. In the third production year, we started losing legume, but look at the grasses. They're really still performing. So good grasses that we have chosen for this particular study based on previous studies are good choice of grass species to include in your mixtures. However, when we come to the 2014, many of the legumes, particularly alfalfa and trefoil, dropped by. Now, some of the white clovers, it looks like they're maintaining a high number of plants, but when we look at the swards or the botanical composition of this, the amount of white clover was less than 5%. So even if white clover is really declining in productivity. Now, let's look at the average dry matter yield between, this is an average between 2012 and 2014 for grass legume rotationally grazed by steers. These are the species we have, and these are the different, 3 different cultivar we use. Obviously, the first thing to notice is that bluegrass and tall fescue seems to be quite productive on average, but even within each type of forage of species, there is a really significant difference in productivity based on which cultivar you use. Let me show you here. In the spring, I want to make a point here about regrowth. In the spring, and early spring, early summer, we got good productivity here. Some of those mixtures, the study that I see the 54 mixtures in this direction, some of them mature much earlier than others. But the real story to tell here, when you come to midsummer, this is a Timothy white clover based. Both of them don't do well in growth during the midsummer. Well, alfalfa does well in this combination and complement the grass, whether it is slow growing or fast growing. So yield potential can be an indicator. So out of the 54 grass legumes combination, we identified 3 species, and within them, there's under Timothy, we have the Variety Express with alfalfa have yielded very good yield. The cutoff choice for those 5 was if they produce 7 tons per hectare during the growing season, they will be the choice. For trefoil, for orchard grass, trefoil seemed to be Arctic is the variety that push that particular grass species and give you good yield. When we go to tall fescue, in each of wet clover or bursary trefoil or alfalfa, you have one cultivar that pull together. With the let me show you the choice of the 5. Here the top 5 that we consider superior based on total dry matter yield. And under white clover we had tall fescue, we used Courtney, and in trefoil we used tall fescue, we said Kokanee, and alfalfa tall fescue Kokanee. But with Timothy alfalfa we used Express, and trefoil orchard grass we used Arctic. Now, if we look at the regrowth yield of those 5 different combination, 3 come to the top potential significantly. The average, mean average of regrowth was around 4.5 ton compared to the optimum of 7. But in general, you're getting about a ton and a half or 2 higher by using these 3 mixtures. Now, white clover, Kentucky bluegrass, you know, this BG3 in the experiment we used is the available cultivar in the market. I just want to remind you, for bluegrass, only in Europe they breed for forage. In North America, they breed them for turf, and a lot of the seed companies assess those species and pick some that they think has got good forage potential, and this is one of them. Now, for long agronomic performance, to summarize, of grass, legume, pasture mixtures, we definitely have to reseed legumes, sod seeding or frost seeding every 2 to 3 years to sustain productivity. Remember, legume provide nitrogen and improve quality. Again, you need to choose compatible grass cultivar to sustain seedable dry matter yield, and those species I showed you and the cultivar they have will help you assemble 2 or 3 different mixtures on your farm. Now let's move on to complex mixtures. This is the second experiment, large experiment we did, where we seeded 4 mixtures, again in a 3 different sites I mentioned earlier. And what we did, we look at forage yield, the seasonal distribution, persistent forage quality, and also we collected animal gain on each of those mixtures, grazing days, animal gain per acre, and we collected 4 core animals per treatment group for data collection on gain and also carcass quality. And when we have too much pasture, we added more animal, and we calculated the gain per acre based on those additional animal based on the production then. Now the grass species we used are the same one that we listed in the question. These mixtures that Stacy read them for you we chose them based on a lot of criteria. Now some of them are more adapted to waterlogging, for example. So obviously when you look at ranking in our region, Atlantic forage species, highest for superior 3 and 1 for the lowest. If you look under drainage, brome grass, smooth brome grass is terrible. It doesn't really survive. So we looked at those criteria and we try to build on those 4 cultivars that we had. No, Stacy, could you have the poll question, the last one?
For sure. All right, so our last poll question here. Which factors influenced you to choose forage mixtures you currently grow or recommend? So is it persistence, drainage, grazing tolerance, species compatibility, or other? And you can choose all that apply. It looks like a couple more people are just getting votes in here, so I'll give you a little more time. Let's take more time to click on more than one. All right. So it looks like grazing tolerance and persistence are the most things that influence their decision the most. After that is species compatibility, and then drainage, and then other. So that's the breakdown.
This is great. We always consult with producers. Many of scientists like me, I don't have a farm. I don't live on a farm, and I really want you, producers, and also the specialists that interact with you, to give us indications so we continuously concentrate on the factors that you really build up your species and management system. So this poll is quite useful. Thank you very much. And let's take a look at those 4 mixtures productivity. The good news is all of them have very good yield, between 8 and 10 tons per hectare, and so all of them have good productivity in same, especially when alfalfa, as we expect, it's higher than trefoil, and but trefoil with those mixtures is still a good yielding. Now let's look at crude protein. When we put those legumes, again, alfalfa has a higher crude protein and than trefoil. Mind you, 12% is not low. It's good enough, and I'll show you why later. But alfalfa is still winning here. When we look at TDN, again, alfalfa is still holding those mixtures in a good quality criteria based on TDN content. Mind you, this data were the average 5 years from the beef cluster study we did in Nepal. But now we looked at the quality, as I said. When we looked at this water-soluble carbohydrate, in trefoil was much higher than alfalfa. This soluble carbohydrate is getting to be very critical. For example, in a lot of studies showed with the sward that have higher water-soluble carbohydrate have give you good productivity. And also, like, to just put it in perspective, I think we have reasonably good water-soluble carbohydrate for the grass we grow, because when we compare to New Zealand, they use perennial ryegrass, and the content is about 15%. So we are lower, but not terribly lower. It's still in the criteria we should be productive with those mixtures. Now, when we do the water-soluble carbohydrate to crude protein ratio, this is very critical because you really want this to be higher. The higher, the better. Again, trefoil is much higher. In fact, in New Zealand, they have 1.2, and trefoil is the closest one to them. Now, this is the Steer Daily weight gain. Again, now trefoil is showing higher, on average, higher daily gain compared to alfalfa. Some of them are very close here, but those particular two mixtures are really showing superior daily gain. And also gain per unit of land area, trefoil again higher. It's around between 450 and 500 plus for this value. And last but not least, the animal gain per ton of forage. This is forage use efficiency from this trial. Again, trefoil is showing a superior growth. Now, these results were very surprising to us, but they were not, because we've been seeing also data from other research sites, from other trials in the past 10 years. They're seeing a better productivity from terms of gain and quality with trefoil. Obviously, the main quality criteria that we tested here, and not indicative to it, but the newer the water-soluble carbohydrate is one indicator. Due to the lack of time, I don't want to bore you to death with making this webinar too long, is that we have been looking at other aspects. Like we found that trefoil had, when we looked at parasites, particularly gastrointestinal nematode, when we spread it over trefoil versus alfalfa, there was lower, much lower, significantly lower nematode that found on the surface of the trefoil versus to alfalfa. What fact could be it? We know that tannin types play a big role, and that allow better maybe reduce parasite infections. Also, it will definitely improve ruminal digestion and bypass protein and many other factors. In fact, the good news is we have been assessing this trial, this concept, looking at the bioactives, whether they are tannin or isoflavine, and hopefully we got early good result, and hopefully we can. Now, let me give you the 20-second summary. Forage mixture performed differently under simulated grazing than animal grazing. Now, I've written in big, cultivars of grass matters. In the past, when I thought cultivar will play a role, but I never seen it play that such a critical role. So obviously it matters. So the choose of cultivar is very critical for you, and we show you some the choices that we had based on our assessment in Atlantic Canada. And the cultivar we chose for Atlantic Canada, they were currently available cultivar in Canada. So if you can decide to use the mixture we suggested, the cultivar should be available there. And then finally, cattle gain better on trefoil pasture than alfalfa. So therefore, we need to reseed legumes every 2 to 3 years to maintain them in the sward. And if we're successful, we put in an LOI for a beef cluster. If we're successful in the full proposal, we're hoping to, our team have developed a new experiment to really overcome and give you a better way how to really reseed your legumes. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation. So now we will open it up to questions. So please type your question, as I mentioned, into the chat screen on this, or this chat box on the side of your screen. If your control panel has closed, you should see a little orange arrow near the top. If you click on that arrow, it'll expand again. So then you can use that chat window to type your question to, and I'll read them out and we'll hear from tonight's presenters. So we actually had a couple questions that were emailed in ahead of time. So the first one here, how much legume do you recommend in a pasture mix for a balance of productivity, ecological function, and risk concerns?
Well, my colleague, particularly John and I, always have coffee together when he's in Truro, or we're working together on manuscripts. We are beginning to wonder if our seeding rate for the trefoil for legumes is been too low, that it's not being sustained long enough. So we would like to see 50+% of the legume content in the pasture in there. And we need to sustain, on average, probably 20 plant per square meter of the different legume. And that's not only a plant being there, the plant that's really viable and vigorously growing.
All right. So the next question here is from someone who farms on sandy soils. So they're looking for mixtures or specific crops that will increase organic matter and nitrogen fixation.
Yeah, some of the grasses like bluegrass, it just doesn't do well under sandy soil. You really need grass species and legume that have deep root system, and tall fescue is one of them. Actually, tall fescue a little while ago, when I graduated from grad school, the quality of that species wasn't great, but it has a very deep roots. The quality, the new varieties have good, properly managed, will have good quality, and so the grasses, there are many choices. The legumes, I'll avoid white clover if you have a sandy soil, because it goes dormant, all the roots are shallow, and so on. So both alfalfa and trefoil, for example, have very good deep roots.
Right. So this one came in early on in the presentation. So when you talked about the graph of seasonal pasture growth, is that only for cool season grasses, and would warm season grasses help fill that summer slump?
Yeah, that's a good idea. A lot of, for example, worm grass, the C4 grass species like switchgrass, they can be used right now. It's a big push for it for biomass production, but we've been assessing it for quality, and it does come later, and it gives you good production toward mid to late in the season, so it can fill the gaps quite effectively. That's a very good question.
All right. So the last question there was, the next question here. Why are you using so much Timothy in the pasture stand?
We're using Timothy for, we found on Timothy stays there. It comes back again. For a long-term persistent, Timothy stay there quite a bit. In fact, I have, when I arrived in Japan in 1987, they had a study that was seeded in 1952 with Timothy. And with good management, 60% of that Timothy survived for so long. So it's a very resilient species. And mind you, it doesn't grow well in midsummer, and it doesn't grow in the fall, but it comes back again. And when you put it in a mixture, it doesn't really compete with it, and it withstands some competition. That's why we use it. And of course, quality-wise, it's quite good.
All right. So next question here says, you didn't mention Alsike clover. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Is this a good legume for pastures?
outside clover is short-lived, and in fact, unless you have a short life pasture, then you could use it. For example, one of the most popular, still most popular mixture is triple mix. It has timothy, it has outside clover, and it has red clover. Outside clover in the first year, it just gives you massive amount of yield. So it really, you think you got really the best mixture you ever have. But what does do, remember I showed you a lot of data that the other perennial species, it takes longer for them to establish. So this heavy competition, you end up with not allowing timothy and red clover to establish. And once the outside clover disappear, you end up with a lot of weedy. So I don't use it. I do have some, and also a short-lived perennial, like I said, it's usually biennial. And also, I've been actually, we've been breeding it to make it last longer, but still not a choice I would recommend.
The next question here, does cultivar selection have the same impact in legumes as it does in grasses?
Yes, definitely. I did mention to you before is that when I concentrate on the grasses in this particular study because grasses can really, they're quite resilient compared to legumes. But we're selecting now. We've been evaluating for trefoil. I have a couple lines. Actually, I'm going to put them in registration trial next year, and they have an excellent regrowth, and also they have very good persistence. So they have cultivar play a big role into that. The unfortunate thing is, if we add 3 cultivar of the other legume I presented, it becomes so massive it will be unmanageable. But but it is important, and we look into effect under grazing. Very good question.
All right. So the next question coming in here, what ratio of trefoil was in the mixtures?
I think we put the total, we put around 10 pounds per acre. But we think, John and I are thinking about it, we were talking the other day, John Danispel I'm mentioning, we were thinking that we really need to bump that number. I know this will add an expense for you because of cost of seeds, and but I think if you get an extra year, the cost will be multiply replaced for you. So we think our rates were on the lower side, and we will do in the next study, we're proposing to do, will increase the seeding rate. And
next question here, what is the best method and season to reseed those legumes back into pasture?
Well, the best time to do it is as early as you can. I didn't show. I had some study I've done before on pasture renovation, and for frost seeding, in pasture I use, for example, white clover. I want to put it back in. I will use cyclone seeder, and I'll put it probably end of March in our climate, and go out with 4-wheeler and spread for white clover every year 1 pound of seeds. And then, because in the white clover study I did, 1 in 3 years you get good catch with frost seeding. Sod seeding, you have to really, it's a bit tricky. The seeders, we're trying now different seeders that will facilitate better soil seed contact. That's very critical. and less competition from the other species. So early in the spring, as early as you can. And the other thing that you need to do for frost seeding or sod seeding, the year you do it, you really have to intensively graze or clip that pasture. Normally we recommend between 20 to 25 centimeters when you enter a paddock. In trying to renovate with the legume, we recommend 15 centimeters. This way will allow the canopy to be open, those little seedling to catch on, and so on.
All right. So do you know if anyone has studied birch foot trefoil in the West, and was it successful?
You know, it's ironic. We might have some producer now from British Columbia. I went and gave a talk about trefoil at Fort St. John's in British Columbia, and there are a lot of people are interested to grow it. Some of them are already growing it. In fact, in Peace River Valley, they used to produce a lot of seed and export it. Trefoil productivity for seed production is done in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So obviously, the utilization of trefoil in Western Canada. One thing I would like to point to you that I have some interaction with farmers who want to seed the new stands, and they ask me which varieties to use. We tell them the newest variety. Right now we have 2 new varieties in the market. One is newer than the other, and they're currently available for sale. AC Langell and AC Bruce. The problem is that if you have a producer that can produce common seed in Canada and sell it to you, you might still get a good, like Leo, for example. If you produce it in Canada, you can use it, but the problem is that there was a lot of demand for trefoil a few years ago that some of the companies that sell seed to the United States, they were importing seed from South America, and that's terrible. It won't persist. It doesn't really work well for us. So I think my recommendation is to go for varieties that have been developed and tested in Canada. They don't have to be developed, but they have been tested in our climate. That's very critical.
All right. So there's quite a few more questions here, so I'll try and sift through them the best we can. What was the palatability of Timothy when grazing beef cattle?
Palatability is very good. I'm glad you asked that question. In that simple mixture, in the binary mixture, the first experiment I had, we did not separate the different mixtures. They were put in one paddock. So obviously, the animal would go and graze on the first one first. So they were grazing on Timothy first, plus with the one that have bluegrass. The trefoil. And in fact, one of the reasons we think we lost trefoil faster in the complex mixture, because when the animal go into the paddock, they graze trefoil way down, and trefoil is not like alfalfa, require enough leaves there to get you photosynthesis for regrowth. Doesn't have reserves in the base of the plant, so obviously eventually it weakened up and get depleted. But Timothy it's got very good quality unless you let it go to head and beyond head stage.
All right. So the next one here, with a stand establishment seeding of 60% legume, do you reduce grass seeding rates to less than 40% of a stand to give the legumes a greater advantage?
No, I will still put the same seeding rate for the grasses, but I'll bump up the amount of legume content in that mix.
All right. So the next question here, what is a good legume grass mix that would be drought tolerant?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
They're asking about a good drought or legume, a good grass or legume mix that would be drought tolerant.
Yeah, well, you can use tall fescue is one of them. It's quite drought tolerant. And the legume, I will choose either trefoil or alfalfa.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations on how to successfully seed legumes into sod?
I've seen a study that I don't think it got published, and where it depends which legume. If you're gonna frost seed and saw seed alfalfa, you're gonna have a bit tougher time than frost seeding or sod seeding trefoil. In fact, the highest legume establishment with sod seeding or frost seeding was red clover, second by trefoil and white clover, and we found very poor capability of using either the frost seeding or for example tie seeding. We used to have access to a sod seeder called Hunter. Hunter, it has a rototiller and it does a trench of about 2 centimeter, 2 inch and a half wide, where it really shred the sod and push the seed into the surface soil, and you can get better establishment. So probably alfalfa can work there for you. And in fact, we tried that with the Hunter with Timothy, and it did establish with the sod seeding very well too.
Okay. So we have a couple of questions here just asking about using sandfoin and Sicer milk vetch. Your opinions on that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I have very limited experience with it. And the experience I have has been 15 years ago. I think Surya Chaira is the better person to answer it.
And actually, Surya did a webinar for us last year, and I will include the link for that in the email, the follow-up email that I send out. So you can get that there. The next, I have a couple other questions about canary grass, reed canary grass, just about the palatability, and then what's the feed quality after it gets up to about 12 inches tall.
I don't know who asked that question. I can hardly wait to answer a question like that, because when that study that I showed you where we had 2 grasses, 3 grasses, and 4 grasses, we learned from reed canary that it doesn't contribute to yield by more than 10%, but it doesn't, even though it's rhizomatous, it doesn't really compete out the other grasses in the mixtures. And the newer variety are highly palatable. The only thing we found in terms of quality, it's very tricky to, from quality of stockpiling reed canary grass. We did the study, we haven't published yet, where we looked at different grasses stockpiled into the fall and also in the winter. And we found that the quality of reed canary grass in the fall and winter is very poor.
All right. So with that, I think that's the end of our questions. So thank you for answering all of those. So there's just a couple more things that we want to let you know about before we go. The first one is how to get more information on science-based production advice. There's 2 different free email lists I'd encourage you to join, both the Ag Canada and our BCRC one as well. If you have Twitter, Facebook, or a YouTube account, you can connect with us there as well. I'd also like to let you know of our next 2 webinars, which will be coming up. The next one will be March 2nd. We'll be talking about bovine TB and understanding the disease and how it's managed within Canada. And the one after that will be on managing internal parasites. So hopefully you'll join us for those as well. So very soon after this webinar ends, you'll be asked to complete a short survey that asks about tonight's session and what you found most interesting and what you would like to hear about for future webinar topics. We do need your feedback to do the best we can to deliver information that's both useful and meaningful to you and helps you make informed decisions on what to do on your operation. So please do complete that survey and don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions at any time. As I mentioned at the beginning, you're going to be receiving an email from me within the next couple of days with a link to watch the recording, as well as links to some additional information. So with that, that's it. So I'd like to thank all of you at home for joining us tonight. And on behalf of everybody, thank you, Yousef, for volunteering your time for that presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.